And I'm going to conclude by suggesting to you that another thing that we could think about doing is preventing childhood adversities. Any of you who've been to the previous 2 lectures, and you really were gluttons for punishment, will recognise this slide for its 3rd outing. And I keep this slide because it's so important. This is a study of young offenders in a Florida juvenile prison. And believe me, those guys are not just there for nicking cars. These are young people, young men who've committed serious acts of violence and have been sentenced to a fairly long stretch in a Florida prison. And we're looking at the amount of childhood adversity that these guys have had. And you'll see that the juvenile offenders, 50% of them have had at least four adverse childhood experiences. And then we look over here on the left-hand side that almost none of the juvenile offenders have had no childhood adversity. Childhood adversity increases your risk of being a violent offender, and it increases it in what's called a dose-response curve. The more childhood adversity you have, the greater your risk of becoming a violent offender. So we need to do something about childhood adversity. And I hope that it shocks you, as it shocks me, that we do not provide any interventions for men and women who are physically abusive to children. We provide interventions for men who sexually abuse children, even though there is no evidence that sexual abuse has any effect on violence risk. But physical maltreatment of children and neglect of children significantly increases risk of violence in adulthood. And yet, when we find a man or woman who's physically abused a child, we provide no interventions for that man or woman at all. And if it's a woman, she may serve a sentence and go out and get pregnant again almost immediately. And it is absolutely startling that we do not provide any interventions for those men and women at all. But prevention of childhood adversity is something that we could do that would have a significant impact on violence. And some people think that the reason that violence rates have been dropping in Europe over the last 50 years is for 2 reasons. One is the more easy availability of abortion and birth control, which would have prevented young children who would have been born to lives of economic hardship and adversity. But also the decline in corporal punishment, that actually there's been a change in fashion. We no longer think it's acceptable to beat or hurt children quite the way that we did. And some people think, some studies in Germany suggest that that's one of the things that may have had a significant impact on violence reduction over the last 50 years. So on that note of hope, I'm going to end, and we